You're here because you want the signal, not all the noise. You want to really get what's important and, why it matters. And that's what we're doing today. It's a focused look, a deep dive into the testimony around Cassandra Ventura's allegations. We're pulling this straight from the Law and Crime Network's coverage on YouTube. So you'll hear insights from Elizabeth Milner, who was actually in the courtroom, plus the legal analysis from Mina and Ben.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to just cut through all the daily back and forth. We want to give you a clear picture of the main points from the cross-examination, what the defense seems to be trying to do strategy-wise, and, the legal takes being discussed right now.
Okay, so let's get right into it. A really key part seemed to be the cross-examination focusing on that 2016 incident, the one at the Intercontinental Hotel.
Yes, definitely.
Why so much time on that? What was the defense trying to do there?
Well, it really looked like the defense strategy was zeroing in on Diddy's state of mind then. During the incident we saw in that surveillance video,
Ah.
they kept bringing up drugs and alcohol, suggesting that was the reason for his behavior. Sort of a classic legal move, isn't it?
Right, arguing diminished capacity or something?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Trying to lessen the perceived intent behind what he did. They even brought up Cassie's own words, remember?
Oh, yeah, the message about him being effed up the wrong way and wanting to, knock me around like a rag doll.
Exactly. They highlighted that specific quote.
And they didn't stop there, did they? They almost floated the idea of, a bad batch of drugs or maybe withdrawal being the real issue. It really feels like they're trying to spin this narrative where his actions weren't totally conscious choices, but more external factors taking over.
Well, yeah, that seems to be the push.
But, how well can that actually work when you've got video?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Suggesting impairment, it might kind of muddy the waters around intent, but the prosecution is likely going to argue back, saying,
Right.
look, the actions happened regardless of why they happened. They still constitute the alleged crime, the alleged abuse.
Right.
So it just adds this layer, for the jury to think about. Was
Yeah.
it deliberate violence, or was it this unfortunate result of being intoxicated?
Mm-hmm.
The defense is hoping probably to create some reasonable doubt.
Okay. So after digging into that hotel incident, the cross-examination seemed to broaden out. It shifted more towards the relationship itself, right? Accusations about cheating, control issues.
It did, yeah. It covered quite a span of time.
So what came up there?
The defense started asking Cassie about times Diddy accused her of cheating, specifically 2016 with some football player.
Okay.
Cassie sort of acknowledged dating someone else around then, but she seemed uncertain about exactly how Diddy found out. But what came next in that line of questioning was, I think, pretty significant. Details about Diddy supposedly taking her phone,
Right.
leaving her without it, and then her mother having to call the police just to get it back.
Wow. Her mother called the police.
Yeah, that detail, it really speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the level of control that's being alleged here.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the phone, apparently. The testimony suggested this was more of a pattern.
That's what came out, yeah. Taking other things,
Yeah.
locking her out, even taking her car sometimes.
It really paints this picture, doesn't it? A relationship with a huge power imbalance. Was there a specific legal reason the defense might be bringing all this up?
It's possible. By bringing up these alleged controlling behaviors, maybe they're trying to suggest a slightly different dynamic.
How so?
Perhaps implying, that Cassie wasn't quite as powerless as she might seem, or maybe trying to suggest it was more complex, like mutually dysfunctional or something. It could be a subtle attempt to chip away at her credibility.
There was also that quick mention, I think Elizabeth Milner brought it up, about a 2013 incident with Chris Brown. Cassie danced with him and Diddy reacted. And what struck me was Cassie saying she didn't specifically remember Diddy taking her phone after that specific incident. Does that suggest these kinds of controlling actions were just so common they blurred together?
That's certainly one way to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if incidents like that were happening all the time, it would make sense that one specific time wouldn't stand out clearly. It kind of underscores how pervasive the alleged control might have been. And that could definitely resonate with a jury as a sign of an unhealthy, maybe abusive environment.
Okay, then things seem to shift again to a 2014 audio recording
Ah, yes, the confrontation.
between Cassie and someone named Sujit Fuji about a sexually explicit video.
That's the one.
This felt like a moment the defense really leaned into, trying to paint Cassie negatively. They focused on her language, the threats she made in that audio.
They did. And the context here is really key. Cassie was clearly upset, reacting to the idea that this private video, this freak-off video, might get leaked without her consent.
And she used some really strong words.
Very strong. Threats like, I will kill you, put you in a desert, cut you, even saying she'd get someone else to do it.
Yeah.
The defense is absolutely trying to use that to portray her as volatile, maybe aggressive.
But didn't her earlier testimony kind of explain that? Didn't she say Diddy's security eventually got involved to get that video back?
That's crucial, yes. Her direct testimony connected Diddy's team to retrieving that specific video.
So, okay. The defense highlights Cassie's reaction, her threats. But the actual issue seems to be this private video existing, the threat of it leaking, and Diddy allegedly using his resources, his security, to manage it.
Exactly.
Does that audio actually hurt Cassie's credibility, or does it just show another side of the power dynamics going on?
It's kind of a double-edged sword, I think.
No.
The jury might react negatively to the threats themselves.
Sure.
But Cassie's distress over the leak and the fact that Diddy's team got involved, that reinforces her earlier points about his control over, well, everything, their activities, the information.
Right.
The prosecution will probably argue, focus on the context. She felt violated, exposed. That's why she reacted that way, not just focusing on the words themselves.
And this seems to lead into that testimony about Jonathan Audi, secretly recording them during these freak-offs.
Yes, that came up too.
And the allegation that Diddy paid a lot of money to stop one of those videos getting out, that seems to fit the pattern, doesn't it? Diddy controlling information, managing potential fallouts.
It really does.
Yeah.
It adds another layer to that picture. Suggests a pattern where, privacy was violated and then significant money was spent to clean things up, essentially. And Cassie's statement that they stopped using Audi after that because she was worried, that underscores her awareness and discomfort with it all.
Okay, and then we got into the, well, frankly, quite uncomfortable discussion about Guerin and the Cowboys for Angel's escort service.
Yeah, that was something.
Reportedly used frequently for these freak-offs, and they even mentioned some reality show connection.
Right, presumably gigolos on Showtime, featuring some of the same escorts, apparently.
What on earth was the defense trying to achieve by bringing up details like that? It felt so explicit and almost tangential.
That's a really good question. It makes you wonder about their overall strategy, doesn't it? I mean, these details might illustrate the nature of their private lives, their activities, sure. But it could easily just seem irrelevant to the core allegations. Or worse, like an attempt to sensationalize things, maybe even subtly shame Cassie.
Yeah.
It's really unclear if that kind of questioning actually helps their case with the jury. It felt a bit awkward in the courtroom reports.
Okay, the cross-examination also went into Cassie's rehab stay in 2023.
Yes, that came up towards the end of this phase.
The defense seemed really interested in why she was there. Was it depression or was it sex and love addiction?
They were definitely probing that distinction.
But she wasn't even with Diddy then, right? She was married, had kids. What's the relevance of her 2023 rehab to alleged events from years before?
It seems like they might be trying to undermine her credibility again, suggesting that maybe her struggles in 2023 could somehow affect her memory or her telling of events from the past. They asked about the specific therapy, too. Brain stimulation, memory recounting techniques.
Trying to imply her memories aren't reliable.
Potentially, that could be the angle, trying to plant doubt about the accuracy of her recollections. But, as you pointed out and as others have noted, seeking therapy after alleged abuse, when she's in a totally different stage of life, that doesn't automatically invalidate her experiences from years ago. It could even be seen as a consequence of them.
And despite all this, I mean, it must have been incredibly intense personal questioning. The report said Cassie stayed pretty calm.
Remarkably so from the accounts. Calm and collected.
She even said she doesn't hate Diddy, acknowledged having love for him earlier in the relationship.
Yes, that statement came out.
How do you think that might play with the jury? Her demeanor, that statement.
Staying composed under that kind of pressure, that can be really powerful for a witness's credibility. And saying she doesn't hate him while still talking about past love, it could make her seem more genuine, Suggesting she's not just motivated by anger or revenge, it might actually strengthen her testimony in their eyes.
Okay, and then near the end of this part, the questioning started moving towards the 2018 breakup, and Alex Fine's name came up.
Right, her now husband.
And he actually had to leave the courtroom because the defense might call him as a witness.
That's right, standard procedure if someone might be called to testify later.
That sounds like it could be significant.
Oh, it is. It suggests the defense is gearing up to directly challenge Cassie's story about the breakup. They might want to offer a different narrative, maybe question her motivations or the timeline through his potential testimony. Removing him from the courtroom signals he can be a pretty key figure in their defense strategy moving forward.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly to the legal analysis we heard from Mina and Ben on Law and Crime. They called the defense cross-examination disjointed, even like they were fishing.
Yeah, that was their assessment.
What did they think the defense was actually trying to achieve? What was the strategy based on what they saw?
Well, their take was that maybe the defense doesn't have one single clear strategy yet. They might be throwing a few things at the wall, exploring different angles.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to suggest Cassie shared some responsibility for the relationship's problems, or trying to find inconsistencies in her story, or just keep hammering that idea of Diddy being under the influence.
Right.
Mina made the point that ultimately the defense has to offer some alternative explanation for the things that are documented, like that video,
Yeah.
that doesn't just put all the blame on Diddy.
And the fact that Cassie settled a previous lawsuit for, what, $20 million, that's inevitably part of the discussion, too.
Absolutely.
How might that settlement affect her credibility now with this jury? It seems like it could cut both ways.
It really could.
Hmm.
On one hand, yeah, the jury might wonder about her motives now. Did she already get paid? Why is she doing this again? But as Ben pointed out, you could flip that. The fact she already got a huge settlement and is still going through this public testimony, that could actually make her more credible to some jurors.
How so?
It might suggest she has less financial incentive now. Maybe it's more about the principle for her or about ensuring accountability. It's really going to depend on how the jury interprets it.
Mina and Ben didn't seem too impressed with the fishing approach during cross-examination. They emphasized needing organized, targeted questions. Why is that usually seen as better in court?
Well, Ben had that great line, never ask a question to which you don't know the answer.
Right.
When you're just fishing, you risk pulling up something unexpected, something that could actually hurt your own case. A more strategic approach is about asking precise questions. You're trying to make specific points, challenge the witness in a controlled way. Disjointed questioning can just look messy, unfocused, and might even confuse the jury or undermine your own story.
Okay, one of the really big questions hanging over all of this is racketeering. Could the testimony we've heard so far actually support racketeering charges later on? What were Mina and Ben thinking about that?
It feels really early for that still.
Yeah.
They had slightly different takes at this stage. Ben felt it was, like you said, too early, too soon to get into the technical legal stuff of racketeering. He thought the focus right now is more about poisoning the jury's mind, as he put it, influencing their perception.
Okay.
But Mina saw potential links. She pointed to parts of Cassie's testimony involving security guards, assistants, cleaning up after incidents, the freak-offs.
Right, the whole apparatus around them.
Exactly. Mina suggested those could potentially point towards a criminal enterprise, which is key for racketeering. And Cassie's testimony about things like drug use, sexual abuse, even the alleged arson attempt, those could potentially be argued as the underlying crimes, the predicate acts you need for a RICO charge, for example.
So a pattern of criminal activity linked to an enterprise.
That's the basic idea. But it's a high legal bar to clear. The prosecution would have to very clearly connect all those dots. We're not there yet, but the seeds might be there in the testimony.
The timing of Cassie testifying, especially right after that surveillance video dropped, that felt very strategic, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It seems like the prosecution wanted to lay that foundation first. Getting Cassie's personal account, her story, behind the events in that video, before presenting maybe other evidence. It creates this powerful emotional context right at the start. It's likely a calculated move to shape the jury's first impressions.
And finally, just briefly, all the rumors swirling around, especially the Justin Bieber one, that he might testify, which he shut down pretty quickly.
Yeah, that got put to bed fast.
It just shows the kind of circus that can surround a case like this, doesn't it?
It really does. High-profile cases always attract speculation, misinformation. Bieber's denial is a good reminder for everyone. Stick to the actual testimony, the official sources, as this all unfolds.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, looking at these initial stages of the testimony, what are the key takeaways for you? What should people keep in mind?
Well, I think it's clear the cross-examination was intense. The defense is really digging into Cassie's past, Diddy's state of mind, especially during that hotel incident. Their strategy seems kind of broad right now, suggesting drugs, questioning credibility, maybe implying shared dysfunction. It's not one single sharp point yet. And the legal analysts are starting to chew on whether this testimony could, down the line, support bigger charges like racketeering. But
Yeah.
as we said, it's very, very early days for that.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're just seeing the first few threads being woven in a really complex legal tapestry. There's clearly a lot more to come.
Precisely. This is just the start of what's likely to be a long and very closely watched case.
Right. And maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given the defense's focus on Diddy's state of mind and events from years back, think about the challenges they face. How do they explain documented events like that video in a way that actually convinces a jury today? Keep that question in mind as you follow the ongoing developments and, of course, form your own informed opinions based on the evidence presented. Okay, so the situation around Sean Combs and that settlement with Cassie Ventura, it just keeps getting more intense, doesn't it?
It really does. Seems like everyone's trying to make sense of it all, parse the headlines.
Yeah, exactly. So for this deep dive, we wanted to look at some expert legal commentary, specifically from that Law and Crime Network analysis you might have seen. They were really breaking down the defense, Cassie Ventura's potential testimony.
Right, and there's just so much noise out there, isn't there? It's hard to sort fact from, well, speculation.
Totally.
So our goal today is really to cut through that. We know you probably have questions, lots of people do, about the legal side of things.
So we're going to unpack the big points these legal experts were making, talk about the potential witnesses they flagged, and just try to get a clearer picture of what's really important here, you know?
Exactly. Using their insights, even some direct quotes from their discussion.
Okay, let's dive in then. First big thing. Potential additional victims and witnesses. It sounds like the prosecution might be lining up more people.
That's right. The analysts on Law and Crime, they mentioned expecting testimony from three additional people alleging similar things.
Wow, 3 more.
And they also mentioned trying to find a fourth potential victim, but apparently they haven't located that person yet.
So, okay, if you have multiple people saying similar things happened, what does that usually mean in court? Does it build a stronger case?
Well, legally speaking, yes. It helps establish what's called a pattern of conduct. It lets the prosecution argue, look, this wasn't just a one-off incident.
Right, it suggests a potential pattern.
And beyond those individuals, the analysts were also talking about others who might testify, people sort of on the periphery, like escorts, maybe male performers, even that incarcerated person who's been mentioned before in relation to all this.
So, a potentially wide net of witnesses. Now, 2 names kept coming up. Christina Coram, the former chief of staff, and Gene Deal, former bodyguard. There have been accusations linking them to, well, alleged racketeering, organized sexual crime. What's the chance they actually testify?
That's still a big question mark. I mean, one analyst suggested the witness list could be huge, maybe like 100 names.
100? Wow.
Yeah, and things in a trial can change really fast.
Yeah.
You know, depending on what comes out. Plus, you have to remember, Christina Coram has publicly denied doing anything wrong.
Ah, right. She did make a statement.
So, yeah, their names are out there in connection with the allegations, but will they actually be called? We just don't know for sure yet. It shows how fluid these things are.
It really does. Okay, shifting gears slightly, Cassie Ventura settlement, the big question everyone asks. If she testifies against Combs now, does she have to give that money back?
Based on the legal opinions discussed in that analysis, it seems pretty unlikely. Testifying in a separate criminal case wouldn't typically trigger a clawback of a prior civil settlement.
Okay, that makes sense. But the settlement itself, how fast it happened, the amount the analyst said it speaks volumes. What kind of volumes are we talking about, even if it's not, a formal admission of guilt?
Well, yeah, a quick, large settlement like that, it definitely makes you look closer.
Right.
Legal experts often see it as potentially showing a strong desire to avoid a public trial, all the negative press that comes with it.
Makes sense. Avoid the circus.
Or could just be practical, avoiding potentially even higher legal fees later on, or maybe just wanting to end something painful, regardless of whether they feel legally liable in the civil suit.
So it suggests something, but it's not like slam dunk proof in a legal context.
Exactly. Not definitive proof of the underlying claims, but especially in a civil context.
Okay. Let's talk about that 10-album contract Cassie signed. That really jumped out at me. 10 albums? Why so many? And why didn't more actually get made?
That's a really sharp point, and it's something the prosecution might really lean into.
How so?
The suggestion floated by the analysts was, well, maybe music wasn't the main point of that contract.
Yep.
They referenced Cassie's alleged statement about freak-offs being part of her job. It kind of paints a picture of a serious power imbalance where maybe her music career took a backseat to other demands.
So the argument could be that Combs used the contract less for music and more for, like, control over her activities, her life.
That seems to be the implication they were discussing, yes. And they also stressed she was only 19 when she signed it,
19!
which
Wow.
just highlights how vulnerable young artists can be with these big, potentially one-sided deals. One lawyer on the panel even said flat out they'd never advise a client to sign a 10-album deal like that.
Yeah, I bet. It makes you wonder about industry standards versus this.
It definitely raises questions about what was really going on there.
Okay, let's talk about witness issues. They mention a witness 3 who might not show up, maybe facing contempt. What does that mean legally? Like, can they be forced to come?
Right. So if a witness has been properly subpoenaed, meaning officially ordered to appear or given a direct court order, and they just don't show up, a judge can issue what's called a copyist.
A copyist?
Yeah, it's basically an arrest warrant to bring them to court. But crucially, if someone's just missing, like they haven't been found to be served this subpoena yet, they wouldn't technically be in contempt.
Got it. But even if they do manage to get a reluctant witness to court, the long crime panel seemed unsure if that even helps the prosecution. Why is that?
That's a really key strategic point. Think about it.
Yeah.
If you have a witness who clearly doesn't want to be there, who maybe had to be arrested to get them there.
Yeah, they might not be very helpful.
Exactly. They could be uncooperative, maybe even hostile. Or they might try to subtly undermine the prosecution's case. The lawyers have to weigh, okay, is what this person might say worth the risk of them damaging our case on cross-examination or just looking totally unreliable to the jury?
Right, it could backfire. Okay, the trial timeline. They estimated 6 to 8 weeks. For a case this big, that feels kind of quick, doesn't it?
It does seem like a focused time frame, yeah. Considering how complex things could get with evidence and all these potential witnesses.
And the analysts were debating when Cassie Ventura should testify, like early on versus later.
Yeah, differing opinions there. Some think putting her on early uses the primacy effect make a strong first impression. Others worry her testimony might fade in the jury's mind over, 6 or 8 weeks with lots of other stuff coming out.
And you never know what future witnesses might say that could completely change how the jury sees things.
Exactly, it's unpredictable.
Now, the million-dollar question, will Sean Combs testify? What were the legal heads on Law & Crime saying about that? It seems like a huge gamble.
Oh, it's massive. Hugely high stakes. I mean, the standard advice in criminal cases is almost always, don't testify, don't open yourself up to cross-examination.
Right, keep your mouth shut.
But interestingly, one analyst did raise the possibility he might. They pointed to that video, the assault video.
The hotel video.
Yeah. And suggested maybe he feels he has to get up there, explain himself, maybe offer a more, direct apology on the stand.
But didn't they also say his first apology, that Instagram video one, kind of bombed? People didn't really buy it.
That's a huge risk, right? It was widely criticized. So putting himself through what would be an absolutely brutal cross-examination after that,
Yeah.
it could blow up in his face.
Yeah, any little slip-up or perceived lack of sincerity could be devastating.
Absolutely. Very, very risky gamble.
Okay, let's look at public opinion versus the actual courtroom stuff. Law & Crime had a poll saying most people thought the prosecution won week 1. But then you see chatter online saying, oh, this just looks like domestic violence, not racketeering. What's that gap about?
It really highlights the prosecution's challenge, doesn't it? Public opinion might focus on the alleged abuse between two people. But racketeering legally requires showing a whole criminal enterprise.
Right, it's a higher bar.
So that's why the prosecution seems to be bringing in things like, okay, alleged escorts from Miami, Vegas, L.A., Ibiza, allegations of blackmail, using those freak-off videos. The idea that sexual activities were somehow organized or orchestrated, they need to build that picture of a broader criminal operation, not just isolated acts.
Trying to connect the dots for the jury into a bigger pattern.
Exactly. And that connects back to why Combs might testify despite the risks.
Oh, so?
One analyst suggested it could be his chance to, use that charisma, that success story image he has, to try and humanize himself, to counter the prosecution's narrative of him being this criminal mastermind.
Like, I'm a successful businessman, a father, not this monster.
Potentially. It's a strategy. A risky one, as we said, but you can see the potential appeal for the defense.
Something else people noticed, his adult kids being in the courtroom during some really graphic, difficult testimony. What's the thinking there from both a human and maybe a legal strategy angle?
Well, on a human level, it's likely meant as a very public show of family support, sticking by their dad.
Makes sense.
But, you have to imagine how incredibly hard it must be for them to sit there and hear those details. Just gut-wrenching.
Oh, absolutely.
Legally, you probably wouldn't want family members testifying directly in a case like this.
Yeah.
Too emotional, maybe bias concerns. But just having them there, sitting quietly, it sends a kind of unspoken message to the jury.
Like a silent character reference.
Sort of.
Yeah.
And it ties into what the analyst mentioned about coaching. Lawyers absolutely coach clients, and even their families sometimes, on how to behave in court. Because the jury is always watching every reaction, every expression.
Right. Courtroom optics are a big deal. Now, the witness list, we know it's not public. Why would they seal it in a case like this? What are the main reasons?
Several likely reasons. First, the nature of the charges, serious sexual misconduct allegations. Protecting potential victims is paramount, especially if some are testifying using pseudonyms, fake names.
Okay, victim protection. Makes sense.
And second, the analyst brought up those allegations that Combs himself might have tried to improperly contact witnesses.
Oh, right. That's serious.
Very serious. If there's any hint of witness tampering or intimidation, sealing the list becomes crucial for safety and just ensuring people feel secure enough to actually testify.
Really underscores how high the stakes are for everyone involved. Okay, inevitably, the social media question, can all this online buzz influence the trial? It's everywhere.
Yeah. It's impossible to ignore the amount of attention this case is getting online. I mean, it's huge.
Right.
Legally, the ideal is that the jury bases its decision only on evidence presented in the courtroom. That's what they're instructed to do.
But realistically?
Realistically, in 2024, with social media being so pervasive, you just have to hope that jurors take their oath seriously and tune out the outside noise. It's a challenge for the system, no doubt.
We actually got some almost live updates from court during the Law and Crime show. Sounded like the defense thought cross-examination would wrap up early. Then the lawyers had a quick sidebar, jury came back, and they read some texts.
Yes, text messages between Combs and Cassie Ventura. They give a really interesting, kind of complicated glimpse into their dynamic.
What did they say?
There was one where Combs texts, "You're going to make a beautiful mother, God bless." She replies, "Thank you, God bless." Then later, he texts, "You are always my ride or die."
Ride or die.
And she responds, "I thought it was nice." Then he says something like, "You've been craving that." And her final text in that exchange was, "Before, I don't think I was craving now."
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to unpack. How could those texts be interpreted legally?
Well, they paint a really complex picture, don't they? The prosecution might use them to show his attempts at control, maybe manipulation, especially with that shift in her tone at the end.
Yeah, that last text.
But the defense could argue, see, this shows a real relationship. Maybe complicated, sure, but consensual, evolving. As one analyst rightly pointed out, though, having feelings for someone, even love, doesn't mean abuse or coercion couldn't also be happening. They aren't mutually exclusive.
A really stark reminder of how messy relationships can be, especially with power dynamics involved. Now, thinking worst case for Combs, if he's convicted, the sentences are potentially huge. Racketeering max life, sex trafficking, minimum 15 years. What's prison even like for someone that famous?
It's hard to say for sure, obviously pure speculation, but it would be an incredibly harsh reality shock. His fame could maybe offer some weird form of protection in certain ways, but it could just as easily make him a major target. The analyst suggested it would likely be extremely isolating, very difficult, regardless of any special arrangements.
Okay, another point that came up, Cassie Ventura's medical records. Did she have hospital records for the alleged injuries? The defense might point to a lack of records, right?
That's a potential defense angle, yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the proof of injury? But it's important to remember, as the analyst noted, victims of abuse often don't rush to the ER or document everything.
Why not?
Fear, shame, maybe control by the abuser, all sorts of reasons. So just because there aren't stacks of hospital reports from back then doesn't automatically mean nothing happened.
And didn't Cassie's original lawsuit have some really specific details about this? Something about records going to Combs' email and him setting up appointments?
Yes, that's a crucial piece. The lawsuit alleged her medical records, even MRI results potentially related to memory loss or head injuries, were sent directly to his email, and that he arranged her doctor's appointments.
Whoa, okay. If that's true, what does that imply? And what about privacy laws, like IP?
If true, it implies an immense level of control, and yes, huge HIPAA concerns. HIPAA is meant to protect your private health information. Sending it directly to a third party like that, without explicit proper consent, that would be a major violation. It just adds another layer to the alleged power imbalance and control.
And it makes the lack of publicly available records seem less significant if he allegedly controlled access to them.
Potentially, yes. And of
Wow.
course, looming over all of this is that 2016 hotel video, which seems to directly show physical violence.
Right. The video evidence. Okay, last main point. The discovery process. We know the prosecution has to share evidence with the defense, but there was some back and forth before the trial about timing.
Yeah, the Brady rule requires prosecutors to turn over any evidence that could potentially help the defense. There were reports of pretrial arguments, with the defense claiming the prosecution was late sharing some things or was bringing in new legal arguments too close to the trial start.
Okay.
What's interesting is that initially, it seemed like the defense wanted a really fast trial, maybe because of Combs' bail situation. But then later they asked for a delay, which the judge denied. So maybe some strategic shifts there.
Sounds like the judge is really trying to keep this thing on track despite the high profile.
Seems that way. Determined to keep it moving.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered a lot. The potential for more accusers, other key witnesses, the whole settlement complexity, that very unusual 10-album deal.
Right. Plus, the strategic chess match between the lawyers, the challenges with witnesses, whether Combs testifies, and just the raw human elements underneath it all.
We really tried to give you a clearer view of what's actually happening legally, getting past just the headlines by looking at what the experts are dissecting.
Hopefully unpacking those details provides a more nuanced understanding for you.
And it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? When you have these clashing stories, these huge alleged power imbalances, what does a case like this ultimately tell us about how hard it is to find justice when fame, influence, and serious abuse allegations collide?
It's a profound question with no easy answers.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.